music and art for this chapter. You have two kinds of music for your test. So I'll be playing some music and you need to pick out which one is Baroque and which one is classical. And then we have one style of painting, which is Rococo. So let's check those out real quick. I can get in here. There we go. All right, so let's look at our characteristics of Baroque music. And if you recognize that word, you know we've already talked about Baroque architecture and Baroque paintings, right? What was the predominant thing you saw in Baroque paintings? Do you remember?
Lots of stuff.
Lots of detail, right? It was almost gaudy detail. So it's kind of the same with the music too. Kind of interesting, but they split it into two chapters. Don't ask me why. So we're going to see a huge change in music for the Baroque period. During the Renaissance, you had two styles of music, and that was it. You had monks who sang in like a droning tone, right? Like here, sing that for us, yes.
Oh.
That's exactly how it sounds, basically. Or you had maybe like a wooden flute and a little guitar playing around a campfire, and that was it. So you're going to see that this really changes music forever. It is very formal in design. Now, I know some of you know music and some of you don't. So let me give you an example you might relate to. If you listen to a song on the radio, you'll notice that there's a pattern to it. So it might start with a chorus, and then verse 1, and then a chorus, and then verse 2, and then they sing the chorus like forever and ever and ever. Okay, that's a pattern. Well, during the Baroque period, they had certain rules of ways you had to write your music, and it always had to be that way. So it was very, very controlled and organized. You'll hear the melody repeated over throughout the song, although we'll hear that again in classical too. So things to listen for on your test. The first thing, this is where instruments are way more important than voice. So almost all of your examples are going to be instruments. Now, I'll give you one exception to the rule today, just because it's a really famous piece, but for the most part, it's going to be instruments. And you want to listen for small groups. They wouldn't have used an orchestra with this many people in the group, like 20-some people. They would have done like a quartet, a group of 2, 3 maybe, but it's usually a small group, okay? So definitely listen for small groups. Now, there were some instruments that they used mostly during Baroque period. The first one is a new invention called the harpsichord. Now, some of you maybe have a piano or you've played the piano a little bit. Tell me what happens when I push that key on the piano. What happens inside?
It like this one thing like hits something and like a ring.
Yeah, so a little hammer hits a string, right? And that's what gives you the noise. So if I want to play a little bit louder, I push the keys harder, the hammer hits harder, right? Well, the harpsichord is a lot quieter, and it actually sounds very different because it's using something different inside. It plucks instead of hits. So just like you pluck a violin, when you hit the key, it plucks a string. So it sounds something like this. We'll give you just a little sample. You'll see it sounds very different. No, not quite, because a harp's kind of dreamy sounding. This sounds plucky, kind of. Very different. So if you hear harpsichord, you know it's a Baroque song or a text. That song is anyway. So we have the harpsichord. We also have, what is this? Yeah, strings, right? So you're going to hear lots of strings, mostly strings. That's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear violin, cello, bass, viola, right? And what is this instrument? It is an oboe. Good for you. Looks like a clarinet, but it has that tiny little reed. It sounds kind of nasal, like a duck, kind of, you know. You'll hear a few oboes or flutes. That's about it. Clarinet hasn't been invented yet.
Can you go back to the picture on the previous page?
Sure.
I think that's a cello, but it looks like the end is missing. Is that
Down here?
yeah?
On the bottom?
An end fit, so they have to cross their legs, kind of like he's doing.
Yeah.
Hold it up, because otherwise it'll just fall right to the floor.
Really? So they didn't have an end pin back then.
You had to hold it on.
Hold it with your legs.
It looks actually really hard to do.
Huh. I've noticed in paintings that they have their legs crossed, but I never knew why. Well, thank you. You taught me something new today. Awesome. All right, so those are the instruments you're going to hear. One of the things that you'll find is that it is the same mood throughout the piece. If it starts happy, it's going to be happy through the whole thing. If it's sad, it's going to be sad through the whole thing. They don't change it up. And we need to talk about this word here, the word dynamics. Can someone tell me, what are dynamics? Louds and softs, right? Okay, so notice what it says. It says when the dynamics or the louds and softs shift, it's sudden, like you're stepping off of a step or a cliff. And the reason for that is because of the instruments they're using. Because most of the instruments are strings. Now, any of you play string instruments in here? Raise your hand. Got one here? Anybody else? Okay. So we'll use you since Andrea shared that story earlier. When I want to play louder on a violin, for example, how do I do that? Okay, so you take the bow and you press harder against the strings, right? But there's only so hard you can press or it might break, right? Yeah. So there's only so loud you can get. So back then what they would do in order to have louds and softs is if I played soft, I would have one person play. Ugh. And then when I wanted it to be loud, I would just have the rest of the group join in at a certain point. So that's why you're not going to hear it gradually getting louder. It jumps from loud to soft. Okay? And it's because of the instrument they're using. It is polyphonic in texture. What does poly mean? What does poly mean? What does poly mean over here? Excuse me? What does poly mean?
Many.
Many. Pay attention, please. Okay, so that means you're going to have more than one line interweaving with each other. And for me, this is the best definition right here. It sounds like church music. And the reason for that is that's what it was played for. Almost all the music that was written for church. Okay? So let's give you a couple of really good examples. Probably the most famous Baroque composer is a guy named Bach. You've heard that name before. And this song, Air on the G string, is a pretty famous one. So as you listen for this, listen for some of the characteristics that we talked about. Oh, sure, I covered it up. Raise your hand if you've heard this song before. Weddings, you'll hear this a lot at weddings. What instruments do you hear predominantly? Strings, right? Yeah, it's all strings. How many people do you think are playing? Yeah, it's like a small group, isn't it? 3 to 5 maybe. Okay, so 2 really good characteristics to look for. Our second piece is done by Handel. And his most famous piece is called the Messiah. And there's different parts to it, but we're going to play the most famous part called the Hallelujah Chorus. Now I'm going to use an exception to the rule. I'm playing it because it's probably a song you just need to know. But there are voices in this example. But I want you to listen for the other characteristics underneath the voices. Okay. Recognize that a little bit? Can you hear the repeated melody over again? Same words, just over and over. And what instruments do you hear predominantly? Strings again. Now in this case, they cheated and they add a little bit of drums and brass because they're modernizing it. But the original would have been all strings pretty much. Maybe a few oboes and flutes, but that was about it. Okay? All right, our second style of music is classical music. All right, during this time period, this is where we see big orchestras become popular, like a group this big or bigger. But you'll notice if you look at this picture that it isn't the kind of orchestra you'll see today. Because in orchestras, we add drums, we add trumpets today. Back then, it was still predominantly strings, and then we added even more wind instruments. What do I mean by a wind instrument? Anybody know? Yes, ma'am. Okay, and why is it called a wind instrument?
Blow.
Exactly, Hunter. You blow air through it, which is going to change a few things. Good. Now, again, we're still not getting into trumpets and stuff yet. We're still talking more flutes and oboes for the most part, okay? But we're going to see more of them predominantly. Yes, sir. If I skipped a couple of things, don't worry about it. I just narrowed it down to what you need since we're starting our test today. So if it's not there, don't worry about it. Lots of different styles of music now. We can have symphonies, string quartets, sonatas. So they have a little more freedom to do what they want. This time, they like to have different moods in their song, but they don't mix it. So what they'll do is they'll say, I have 3 sections to this piece, and you actually stop. This is when you go to that concert and they stop, but you don't clap. You ever had that at a concert?
Yes.
And you're like, why am I not clapping? It's because it's in sections. So the first section might be really exciting. The second section might be sad. And they do it by mood. Okay? You're going to see the use of crescendos and decrescendos. They look kind of like this in the music. Who can tell me what is a crescendo? Yeah. And is it immediate or gradual? Gradual. So it gradually gets louder and 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 louder until it gets really loud, right? And the reason why we start seeing this is because we have more wind instruments. If I want to make a flute, who plays a flute in here? Anybody? All right, Rebecca? If you play the flute, how do I make the flute louder? You blow more air, right? So we can control our volume by how much air we blow into it. So it changes our volume. Good. You will see melodies question and answer each other like we saw before. But we have 2 brand new inventions. What are they? Okay, we've got the piano now. So if you hear the piano on your test today, it's going to be classical. For at least for this test anyway. We'll get into some more stuff later, but right now piano would be classical. And how about this? What's this? Opera. Very good. Opera becomes the huge thing to do. Very popular. What's really cool about classical music is that it begins to be written not just for nobles or royalty, but it's written for anybody. So anybody could go to those operas, anybody could learn how to play the piano. So everybody became a part of music. You'll see secular music becoming popular. What's secular? Non-religious. Good. We hear that coming up every chapter, don't we? Because they're playing in other places besides church now. They're playing for the king. They're playing at a party, whatever it might be. Opera music. Lots of types of opera, everything from comedy to drama, love stories, all kinds of things. And this is a test that works most of the time. It doesn't work with a slow song. But if you use a fast song and you try to actually hum the melody and you can't hum the melody, it is probably classical. And the reason is because they're trying to show off these right here, your fingers. Whether it's playing on the piano or playing your instrument, they're trying to show how fast and furious your fingers can go in a fast song. So they're showing off your talents. In fact, Mozart was accused of this by the king. The king said, you have too many notes, just take a few out and it'll be perfect. And what do you think Mozart said?
Oh.
He's like, screw you, man. He said, my music is perfect. He was really cocky. My music is perfect just the way it is, so don't tell me what to do. So we'll actually test that out here and see if it works for you. Luckily, someone stepped in at that moment and calmed things down because he could have gotten in big trouble, yes. And actually, a lot of royalty did not like Mozart because he was so cocky and he was very arrogant. All right, and of course, if you hear the piano, now those of you that play piano, we don't have the pedals that like blur the sound quite yet. That's coming up later. Just straight piano. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. This one is done by the master himself. Mozart is probably the most famous classical composer. And as you listen to this, listen for your characteristics. See if you can hum this melody. It gets worse. See how that's hard to hum? It's because he's showing off these, isn't he? What's the most obvious reason why this is a classical song? It is a piano. Very good. And the too many notes thing. You got it. Good. Second one is by Haydn. Listen for your characteristics and tell me why this one is called the Surprise Symphony. You listen to the music, what instrument do we hear mostly? Wind still, and strings, lots of violins, yeah. Good. Okay, so why is it called the Surprise Symphony? Yeah, you get that blaring sound. And it was because they were playing with louds and softs in the classical period. And they found that when they did a really soft section, the audience was falling asleep. So that was his way of waking up the audience. And it worked. It worked very well. All right. Okay, we have one style of painting to know for this chapter, and that is the Rococo style. And if you look at the name Rococo itself, it actually is a clue for you, because Rococo in French means shell, and they call it Rococo because they would use these little half shells in all their shrubbery, flowers, trees, bushes, and before you know it, it turned into a flower or a bush. See that? All those little half shells make up the shrubbery, so that's why it's called Rococo. So that's why you'll see it's very rounded. So take a look for that. It is a French thing, came from France, very popular in France. You'll see that they are painting aristocrats or nobles. These are wealthy people who are usually well known. And they are doing some kind of a leisure activity, something for fun, because they have the money and the time to do it. Everybody else was working in the fields or doing something manual labor. So we're showing something fun. For example, a picnic in a beautiful lakeside environment or something like that. Those beautiful aristocrats will be wearing gorgeous clothing because they're the only ones that can afford it. So you're not going to see tears in their clothing or holes. They're not going to be dirty and all, from work. You're going to see the beginning of pastels in our paintings. Pinks, yellows, light blues, stuff like that. So that's kind of fun. The figures are also beautiful. They are tall and slender. So you're not going to see somebody that's overweight or a whole face full of zits or something like that, because they're just trying to show how beautiful life is. Okay. You can share that with your group there so we can look at some examples. I'll give you guys this one. Okay, a few more. We'll also see nature settings a lot with the trees and the bushes in the background. And there is no event to disturb the happiness of the scene that you see before you. Now, like any other time period, there are certain things that are popular. And in this time period, roses were really a big deal. So quite often you'll see roses. And they also love getting their painting done with pets. So you'll find animals in them. So I want you as a group to take a look at the picture your group has been assigned. And raise your hand if you have pastels in your picture. Raise your hand if you have pastels. Like pink, light yellow, light blues, stuff like that. Okay, good. If you have gorgeous clothing, raise your hand, please. If that's yours, guys, keep it. Okay? Like rich clothing. Okay. If you see a pet, raise your hand, please. An animal. And tell me what you have.
Oh yeah,
What do you got? A dog? Do you have any animals? Nope. Animals, what do you got?
Dog.
A dog. Good. What do you got? A dog.
Dog.
A dog. And there's one that has a cat and a bird in it. Where is it?
there's one on the floor.
Yep, that would be yours, guys.
That'd be a cat.
Yep. You have a cat and a bird. Yes. Okay. If you have a leisure activity, raise your hand, please. Means they're doing something for fun. What do you got? What are they doing?
Voting.
Blind stand block.
They're playing a children's game. Good. What do we got over here? She's reading. Excellent. What do you got over here?
I don't know what they're doing.
Picnic. Going on a picnic. Swinging on a swing. Good. What do you got?
Eating, he's playing.
This is actually a music box. So what do you think they're doing? Listening to music and dancing. Good. What do you got going on over here?
She's partying.
She gets giving what the young.
Okay, take a look, guys.
She's partying.
When we talk about a perfect example of the Rococo painting, Fragonard is a great example because this painting has every technique we just talked about except a pet. It's the only one we don't see. We have pastels. She's swinging. She's doing a leisure activity. You'll see the Rococo shells. Now, the Rococo shells might be in the bushes or trees, but they also might be in the dress. You might see that in the way that they paint the dress. You'll see that, obviously, it's a beautiful, elegant person in beautiful clothing. Okay? Yeah.
Is that the painting that's in Frozen?
Yes, it is. It is in the movie Frozen. I forgot about that. Yeah. The second one is done by Mr. Boucher. Mr. Boucher did beautiful paintings, not Bobby Boucher. And this is the Marquis de Pompadour. The Marquis de Pompadour, are we listening? The Marquis de Pompadour is a person you've studied already. This is the person that slept with King Louis and was known for her salons. Remember her? Okay. Now, if you'll take a look at our characteristics, we have our pet. You've got roses all over on her dress and around. She's reading a book. She's got a beautiful dress on. She's elegant and beautiful. Okay? All right.